right.
All right, here we go. So hello, everyone. Happy January 19th, 2021. Never has any group of people anywhere been so happy to announce that we're in 2021. I'd say the world is happy. So hopefully the worst is behind us, and things will be a lot better, I'm hopeful, by summertime. Let me remind everybody as they're logging in to turn off their cameras and turn off their audio so we can just have our speakers on as soon as I hand it over. And I'm Dan Bell from the Hampton Roads Innovation Collaborative. We are the region's tech council, which is a nonprofit that was established in the late 90s. We are a volunteer-only organization, virtual organization, and we provide what we like to think is supportive programs to the entrepreneurial and technology base within Hampton Roads. We certainly we're running with quarterly critical mass programs and networking opportunities and our annual Tech Expo. And like everybody else, COVID-19 put a damper on that. So those things will return as soon as it's safe. But in the meantime, we're continuing to achieve presence and value-added materials and programs for our constituents and friends. And we have a number of board members on this call as well. And I want to thank you all, including Tom Marsden, who has been a very supportive one. And I think that's about it. I want to apologize also that I pepper you with emails about these programs, but that's the way we have to do it. Because every time I announce the program and send out a reminder, a handful of registrations come in, up to and including some that come in right about now. And so it's not meant to be annoying, it's meant to be informative and making sure that that you remember that we're out there with a program coming up. And holding true to that, as early as this evening, no later than tomorrow morning, you're going to see the announcement for our next program, session 4, which is going to be about offshore wind. And it should be very, very informative with members from ODU's project, offshore wind project, as well as Dominion construction. So it should be very, very informative. With that, I'd like to turn it over to my friend, colleague, board member, Tom Marsden from Marathon Consulting. And Tom, thank you once again. Pete, I'll also thank you, but I'll let Tom do the introductions.
Okay.
And we're looking forward to your program.
Awesome.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Dan, for the introduction. And Pete and I are both happy to be presenting today, and we'll try to make it as exciting as we can. You know, just when you hear big data and artificial intelligence, you think of, well, they host week-long conferences on these subjects. So what are we going to do for a quick lunchtime talk? And we're going to try to keep it fairly preliminary and talk about sort of the evolution of AI and how big data supports the initiatives that are happening today. We will get a little bit technical and show you some successful case studies and some things that are going on and share a couple videos. So we're pretty excited to go through a lot of that stuff and hopefully open some eyes and get some ideas flowing to how big data and AI can impact your businesses, things that you're working on, or potentially new ideas down the road. We also will, and I will run through, you know, obviously I'm from Marathon Consulting. I'll run through some of the services that we provide and give a little bit of background there since we are sponsoring today. And initially this presentation was meant to go at the Tech Expo. So we're really excited to give it today as well. We will go through first, you know, basics, like I said, big data and AI overview, and then really get into some application examples, look into forecasting, how you would use AI for inventory management, even get into some predictive maintenance ideas. And we'll actually go through a couple use cases happening in our backyard here as well. And then we'll go from there into any questions. Since we're lucky for Pete and I to both be presenting today, we're going to kind of watch the chat if any questions come up. So if anybody has anything throughout the presentation, throw it in there. And we'll just interrupt each other with questions and jump in there so we can try to keep those questions, topical to the slides that are going on. So quick introductions. I'm very happy to get to work with Pete DePiola on this. We talked multiple times leading up to this presentation, and it's really cool to collaborate with Microsoft, being a Microsoft partner ourselves at Marathon. Pete is the Azure Global Director, Program Manager Leader at Microsoft. He used to work in the specifically in the big data and AI space, which is why we're talking about this today, but now functions more on large scale Azure projects. Pete, does that cover that well?
Yeah, sure does. Yeah, and it's good to see familiar names and faces on the call. It's great to see everybody again. So yes, to Tom's point, I am now one of the program manager leads for what's called Azure Global, and that covers our air gap clouds for Microsoft or for our government customers, as well as some of the sovereign clouds across the globe, like places like in Germany and Brazil and other places. Yeah, my area, my team focuses specifically now on innovation and special capabilities, but more so trying to land our customers on some of these clouds. So, yep, that's it. And then there's my LinkedIn info there too.
Perfect. And our goal today really is to keep Mr. Gates and Mr. Nadella behind him happy. So we'll try our best to do that. So there might be a token Microsoft reference throughout, but obviously a lot of the concepts we're talking about today can be expressed on any platform and any service. And just prefer you to go with into Azure and Microsoft. I myself am a vice president at Marathon Consulting. My main focus areas are basically on custom application development, mobile development, and web application projects. I'm lucky to serve on the HRIC board and really passionate about making sure that we have a strong technology community here in Hampton Roads. So quick background, there's 5 Marathon people on this call, plus a bunch of people who I'm sure familiar with our background. And I'll, I'm sure, be graded and get lots of feedback on this after. But just a quick background on Marathon. We started in 2006, so we're in our 15th year this year. We have both offices in Virginia Beach and Richmond, expanding to Richmond about 4 years ago. We're lucky enough to have a big team now, about 90 consultants, all with a lot of experience. It really comes down to our people, being able to provide successful services here and there. And you can see some of our partnerships on the right there. We use Embraco for a lot of our web development opportunities, and we're a Microsoft partner in a lot of different categories. That is primarily the technology we work with, but really we work with anything and everything that our clients need. Like I said, experience is the base of all of our success, making sure that our staff are accountable, they're Marathon employees, and they're going to be there a while. You see a couple of those things referenced here in that, we experience the quality of our people and that continuity where, a client can come back to Marathon at any time, maybe 5 years after a project was completed. And we've had great success in that there's someone still at Marathon familiar with that project or the original developer that might have been on that project. And in today's IT world, that is really hard to find and something that we really pride ourselves in doing. We keep our success rate up on our projects and make a big effort to make sure that we're making our clients happy at any time. And you'll see as I go through some of our service overviews, we play in different lanes so that we can work on maybe a web application project, which would spin into a mobile app project, which might come into an AI project down the road as you work with that data. So that continuity, that breadth of service can really help there. We work primarily in the private sector and state and local government. We do not work in the defense space or federal government space, which allows us to keep agile and work on projects of various different sizes, from the small to medium to large size businesses. There's some logos. Maybe a couple people on the call are featured in those logos there that we work with. And just a quick overview on services. So Marathon really got started doing custom application development in its formation, and that has then expanded into doing, more mobile application development, enterprise tools, SharePoint development, and web services. Those are areas that about a quarter to a third of Marathon work in on a day in, day out basis. Now I'm jumping over one. You noticed I skipped a symbol, but IT advisory is basically the area of Marathon where our project managers and our business analysts, who are key parts to any project that we run, and we provide that services to our clients. So if we're running a large scale project, we want to make sure we do the proper requirements up front. We have a project manager running that project. And we really use this group of skilled individuals to also do other projects that might include software evaluation or package software selection, as well as project management services at a client site or business analysts at a client site. And digital marketing is really a group that spawned out of custom application development. And we started doing so many web development projects that they really needed a group on their own, and have just expanded since then. And most of the time, these are projects that have some sort of CMS backing, but grow in scale from transportation portals to fully blown e-commerce sites. We also, alongside of those services complementary, we provide SEO and pay-per-click sort of advertising and social media marketing to make sure that those sites flourish. And I conveniently left data solutions to the last, because that's really what we're talking about today. At the core of any big data project or AI project, there's the data behind the scenes that makes that all work. The models that get trained or anything that happens. And Marathon provides a lot of solutions to sort of build up those models, whether to integrate data sources from different parts of your business or other third parties, to warehouse that data, to building, a large scale data visualizations and custom reporting, and to providing data scientists and data analytic professionals that can really look at your data and glean some, insights that can put that data to work where you're making decisions directly off of what's happening. And then eventually training, models and cloud computing so that you can start getting into that. And we'll talk about that evolution today. So as I segue into, Pete's going to give us kind of the overview of how that gets started. And I'll turn it over to Pete, and I'll kind of watch the chat to see if anything comes up.
Yep. Okay. Thanks, Tom. Appreciate it. So I think, like Tom said before, I started my career in what used to be just called data analytics. And, right out of school back in West Haven, Connecticut, I worked for the Veterans Administration Hospital, where they didn't call it data science back then. They called it, I was the stat guy pretty much. Right. So, but it has morphed over time from, statistical analysis and looking at data from that perspective, to what we call now data science, and it's becoming AI. So where we've come from and where we're going. So it's interesting because I've seen a lot of this in action, where we've kind of looked at the descriptive analytics, where we're saying, hey, kind of what happened, right? We know that something happened in the plant, or shipping didn't go out, or there was some problems with our logistics. So what happened? So then you're running the reports to see where the problem might have been. That then began to shift into answering the questions of, why did it happen? Then we started tweaking the reports and the data that we were getting to look at some of the reasons, some of the possible outcomes, and why it happened the way it did. And so now we're starting to see this shift in the industry towards more of like, what do we think might happen, right? What will happen? And that's where we start getting into some predictive analytics and those types of things, right? And then there becomes like, what are some of the capabilities that we have as an organization, and how can we make happen what we want to happen? Like, how can we align our skills and our personnel to what the market is demanding, or what our constituents or customers or troops or whoever is looking for, and what we need to do, right? So we're kind of seeing this progression of from looking in a rearview mirror to now we're actually trying to look down the road a little further.
I got this.
Is there somebody have a question, or do we need to mute?
Sense to you.
Okay.
Let me scan the list and see if I see a hot mic. I'll turn it off if I do.
Okay, sounds good. All right, so go ahead, Tom, next slide. So, you know, it's a little bit of a transformation, a journey, right, that we start with. So we start with descriptive and diagnostics. Go ahead, Tom, you can start building that out. Where we have, like, you know, business intelligence enablement, right? And what do we need to do there, and who are the people that are involved? We have information workers, we have, you know, the functional areas like the business analysts who have all the knowledge of the business, right? And you're kind of combining that with the BI enablement to get them the data. And then this is where you start moving into the predictive, prescriptive, and more of where we'll talk about in AI, which is more of the cognitive things, right? So we make this transition from BI enablement to advanced analytics to more of the AI, which is more about modeling scenarios, modeling certain situations, and those kind of things. If any of you have like either a Ring camera or a Wise camera that you have at your house, you'll know that there's a little gauge that tells you what's the percentage of accuracy that you want. Well, that's kind of what AI is really about. What it's doing is it's looking for people or animals in those videos to say, is this really a person, right? And so it's never, you could set it as 100%, but then you may not get, you know, some hits. So we'll talk a little bit more about that going forward. You know, and at the bottom of this, we've got line of business systems, right? And that's where all of our data comes from. But in the middle here, this is what, over my career, what I've seen has been the key thing to starting any kind of advanced analytics or AI program or strategy for your company or your command or whatever is to really, where are you with an enterprise data management, right? Because it's a matter of pulling data together, pulling different resources together, and making and getting to the decision points that you need with the data. So enterprise data management is one of the key components to make all this work, right? Whether it's just data analytics or whether it's AI, you still need some kind of idea around where your data sits and how it can be used. Go ahead, Tom, you can go to the next slide. So this is just some of the anticipated outcomes that our customers see with advanced analytics. This is just a quote from MIT Sloan Management, which is basically saying that data has become a key input for driving growth, enabling business to differentiate themselves and to maintain a competitive edge. You may have heard this, that, you know, data is the new, gold or cash in the business. It's an asset. You know, any data that your organization has now, people need to start looking at that as an asset, a competitive advantage, that you may have information that you could put you one up on your competitors, or put you one up on, you know, if you're in the military, put you one up on the bad actors, right? So it's important that we look at, you know, what data we have, and then how can we augment that data. The idea here is that you want to really kind of, with advanced analytics, get to more richer insights with your data and begin to look at how can I really look at my business from a different perspective with the data I have. How can I improve operations? Or if you're making product or you're selling product or services, how can I do a faster time to value? Is that what we call, instead of faster time to market? We want to make sure our customers are getting more value out of what we're selling, right? So part of that is in the equation of, like, what do our customers consider value, right? And how can we align our skill sets and our capabilities with the value they were perceived? And then increasing innovation. If you're product development, or you're looking at new ways of doing things, then this kind of helps to reimagine and look at some of those things, maybe reduce costs in that operation when you're trying to modernize or change the way that you're innovating and doing business. So that's just a quick slide on that.
The key thing is there, Pete, right? If you don't have that data, how do you even measure the things that you're trying to do or improving, right? So
Right, exactly.
that
Yes.
feed-
Thank you, Tom. So you can go to the next slide. So this, I'm not going to drain this slide out, but the whole point around this is when you look at human and the level of human involvement, when you start looking at data transitioning to more data science, artificial intelligence, the human involvement gets less down the road. It doesn't mean I mean, to get to a 0%, that's like activating Skynet and Terminator, right? It's got total, awareness now. There's still, that should actually say 1% at some point, because you're never really done with an AI project, right? Because it involves more iteration, and I'll talk a little bit more about this later, but it involves a little bit more of iteration and modeling, which, modeling is a little bit like experimentation. You keep trying things, you're tweaking, because it's, you're not quite getting the results that you want. So this slide here, you can kind of look at the different cognitive models and kind of where we were 5 years ago. And I'd say that's probably maybe even a little bit longer than 5 years ago, to where we are, where we're going, right? So for example, like natural language processing, which is one of the components of cognitive services, is, spell and grammar check. Yeah, 5 years ago, that should be more like, 15 years ago, right? We had that a long time ago. But we start then transitioning to what's called supervised learning, which is, voice to text, dictation, those kinds of. So we're now translating what we're saying in our words coming out of our mouth to text. And then it starts getting into, now we're starting to get personal assistants, or, kind of chatbot kind of things for Q&A. So if you go online and you're looking at your insurance company, you always see a little bot that pops up saying, "Hey, do you want to chat?" And that's, you're not really chatting with a person. You're actually, it's pulling information and it's relaying information to you based on what you're asking. And if it gets too deep, then they always say they're going to transfer you, right? To then you start moving into unsupervised learnings, and then self-aware, which is, I've seen a few customers, very few, that are actually using, that are almost to that point. I don't think you ever get to that point 100%, just because of the way the models have to be constantly looked at and tweaked. Then you have things like computer vision, which you see in manufacturing when it's taking images of product, looking at defects, those kind of things, to facial recognition, biometrics. So again, I'm not going to go through all of this slide, but just to kind of show you, this is for a reference, show you how the progression in each one of these areas has come, the line that it's taken. So go ahead, Tom. So a question for the group, and what is the opposite of artificial intelligence? Go ahead, come off mute really quick and shout it out. I'll give you 5 seconds and then I'll give the answer. Of course, the answer is natural stupidity, right? So unfortunately, we haven't gotten to the point where we have folks that are, totally reliant upon that. So we do make mistakes as humans, and we do make mistakes on sometimes mundane kind of things. So when we talk about artificial intelligence, there's a lot of different components to that, right? And there's things like, you might hear terms like, expert systems, data mining, predictive analytics, machine learning, deep learning, neural networks. You're going to hear these terms, right? And these terms are usually what's all referred to as artificial intelligence, right? So, but it's really, AI it starts to look at like how humans actually work and operate, right? So go ahead and advance, Tom. So when we look at, like, it's a way that we can start looking at the way humans actually look, with vision. We see things, we speak things, we hear things. So, and then there's reasoning, and we're able to predict, right? And so some of that is pretty easy based on our experiences, based on what we've learned. The longer we've been walking this earth, the more experiences we have, the more knowledge we have. And so when you think about developing a model that's going to help mimic that or do some of these things, it's going to need information, just like we've gathered all this information. So You know, a 5-year-old kid's not going to make the same, given the same decision, not going to make the same decisions, you know, somebody in their 30s is going to make because of the knowledge that they do or don't have. But when you start looking at, this is why enterprise data management is so important in this discussion, is because it begins to pull all that knowledge and data together to make that the decisions that you're wanting it to make, right? And again, it doesn't come down to, hey, tell me what I need to do, right? Artificial intelligence is never going to tell you what to do. It's going to give you, hey, the probability of this happening is X, right? Probability of this happening might be 80%. Now you have to make a decision, is 80% good enough, right? Is that good enough for me to call it a yes? Some cases, yes. Some cases, no. You know, if I can't think of a really good example off the top of my head, but I mean, if you're like, I'll use the camera, the Wise camera thing, right? So I have one that's set up in my backyard, and it says, hey, did you see a person in this, right? And because I have it set to maybe 60%. And it'll just, if it sees something move, it might be a squirrel, it might be a dog, it might be whatever, I'm going to basically send it feedback. I'm going to say, no, that wasn't a person, right? But if I jack it up to like 90%, then it's gonna tell me I'm going to have the probability of being a person a lot more accurate, right? Because it knows what a person looks like. It knows that a person is going to has different motions because it's been trained to look at people and as people walk, right? And it's going to be trained to do that. And so it's all about really how we perceive things and how we are going to predict things. That's really the where AI kind of mimics what we're doing. So I'm gonna take a quick pause there. Go ahead. Yeah, thanks, Sam. Take a quick pause there, see if there's any questions. Okay, so the term AI was coined by a guy named John McCarthy. He was a computer scientist back in 1956. So the term has been around for a long time. And it's the idea of basically having machines mimic the functions associated with human minds, right? So what is it that we do, some of the mundane things, like I could sit there in my back window and look for people all day long, right? I'd rather not, right? Or I can look for, dogs, stray dogs running through my backyard. But I'd rather have a camera that does that and it says, yeah, here's a dog, and it sends me an alert, right? So that's kind of the idea around, it's just going to replace some of the mundane tasks, right? So, in AI, it can perform several tasks like recognizing patterns in data, or more efficiently, giving us better insights into it, right? So it's really about learning. It's teaching, the algorithms to learn, and then you're teaching it to reason, and then how it's going to interact with you or other people, right? So, and how that's going to look. Go ahead, Tom. So when I get often asked by a lot of customers, like, how can I get started with an AI, strategy, right? What do I need to be thinking about? And sorry that text is kind of small on these, but I'll read you the top three. It's they're on the left, but basically the top three barriers to organizations, whether you're private sector, government, is really just a lack of a clear AI strategy, right? And followed up by lack of talent and lack of appropriate skills. I mean, not everybody's a data scientist, and data scientists are, they're a little bit more focused on, they're not your DBA that's going to go ahead and start, coding a bunch of models, right? They could be, but a data scientist is truly a scientist. There's somebody that really understands statistical analysis, knows how the data should all be relating to another and how it's going to get you to the point where you can make decisions with the models, right, with the data. So finding those people, it's not easy. And I know I know Marathon is some of the local partners, especially Marathon. They've been finding these people, and it's usually people with math degrees coming out of college, math or really science, or people that have worked in labs, right? Have done analysis. That's where I got my start at the Veterans Administration Hospital. I was working for a research doctor, and we used to do all of the analysis on the patients that were taking certain medications, right? And what their reactions were. He was logging all that information. We were analyzing that. So pretty cool stuff. And then the last barrier is going to be the silos, right? And having, again, we're talking about the data stores, right? The end-to-end enterprise data management piece of this.
Yeah, I think this slide is really telling, Pete, and matches some experience that we've had where, you know, sometimes clients of ours are excited to, you know, we need to be doing this, we need to be there, but don't really have a strategy of what they want to do. And lacking, I would say lacking data, or lacking the fundamental data, which is down there, a couple bullets, is one that we definitely see a lot as well.
Yep. Awesome. Okay, next slide. So there's several ways that I've seen that, and I would always recommend. So these are thoughts for strategy. If you're thinking about, okay, I need to come up with an AI strategy for my company, my division, my department, whatever it might be. You know, there's 3 schools of thought that, you know, I've seen out there. You know, centralized AI, where you have a small group of people in control of of AI, where, you know, it's all right. There could be some scale there, but there's no real empowerment, meaning there's no real knowledge of what's happening in the functional area. Because when you look at building AI models to improve your business, you have to have the person that understands the business and it knows kind of what yes should be. Should yes be 80%, or should yes be like 100%, right? Where on that spectrum does something like look like a yes or no? And so, but then you have, you know, typically this would be like having the IT organization that really kind of owns all of that, and kind of getting back, that's more of a traditional IT. And then you have the decentralized, where now I've seen some customers are taking all of their AI, you know, people, and they're putting them in the functional areas, putting them in the business, which it's great. But you have pockets of innovation that's not really spread across the organization. And then when it comes to, you know, principles and practices that are common, because you want to have some standard common principles and practices when you're developing AI and look in models and things like that, and you're looking at how it's going to change your business. It's always helped to do that. And then some customers have actually created a whole AI like department division, you know, separate right out. And so, and that helps because now you've got all the data scientists in one room, and they're all kind of thinking of, you know, common practices, principles, sharing information. It's great. It'll help with innovation, and it, you know, connected to the business. But what I've seen that works best is where you go ahead and finish out the slide, Tom, please, is where you have this kind of hybrid model where you centralize principles and practices for AI. You centralize the data management, enterprise data management for it, included in what's called data wrangling, right? Because when you're pulling the data together to run through these models, you could be pulling data from many different sources, right? And typically data scientists, from my experience, they're not programming people, they're not IT people, they don't understand really what schemas look like, or how to work with a schema, or how to run, you know, data extracts, right? So you need that kind of function, those kind of people to help work alongside of them. And then, you know, having the business owners really kind of drive it and own the models, right? Because like I said, when you develop a model, it's not just a set it and forget it. It's not, hey, I got this model developed and all's good. Well, over time, data is going to change. The knowledge of what this model is pulling in is going to change. The environment's going to change. You have to continually monitor these things. And that's where, you know, having a group that's, you know, responsible for, you know, these models and the outcomes that these models are producing has to constantly be monitored, right? It really does. You have to constantly look and test. So it's no longer that we write you know, in the old software world, waterfall approach, we write a piece of software, turn it over, we're done until somebody wanted a bunch of modifications. No, there's that constant reiterations and iterations of looking at the model, testing the model, making sure it's all working. So, all right, you go ahead, next slide. So this is just kind of an ops plan, if you will, machine learning ops for the end-to-end life cycle, where we have, you know, we're building the models, we're training the models, validating, which is kind of what I was just talking about a little bit, and then deploying, and then there's the monitor process. So this is just kind of sums up what I've been talking about as far as building and training. Training just means you're throwing sample data at it and making sure it's sort of in general doing what you want to do it, and then validating it, making sure that the results are what you expect based on the sample data, right? Based on what you're doing. And then when you deploy models either through the cloud or on-prem, and now that you're seeing some more devices, what we call edge devices, where we now can run models at the edge, meaning that in the past, say, I know with some of our satellite systems, the data would come down a satellite pipe, and we'd process the data and then send back up the pipe any kind of revectoring or any kind of changes that we need to make to the satellite, right? Whatever it might be. Now you can actually, there's edge processing at the satellite that actually it can determine based on the model and based on what's been done, how to revector, right? If it needs to, right? So, and those are just some examples of that. You're starting to see some of this kind of now happening in some of the newer cars like the Teslas and those kind of things where, it's going to know that, hey, depending on your driving habits, it's going to tweak your response back on your gas mileage and what's happening with your driving. I know some insurance companies now offer that driver monitoring, and it tells you it's kind of monitoring if you're braking too quickly or you're in fact, this happened to me a couple of months ago. I had to stop really quick because there was a car that cut out in front of me. And I guess it pushed some kind of limit where at some point, some model says, hey, that was a yes, he got into an accident. And next thing I know, I'm getting a call from the insurance company saying, is everything okay? Right. And I'm like, what are you talking about? They're like, well, we just got it registered that you could possibly be in an accident. Now, if you weren't in an accident, that's great. We're happy. But it just seemed like, you came to a stop all of a sudden, and we just want to make sure you're okay. So that, that's a little freaky, but you know what? I was, kind of glad that they're monitoring stuff like that in a sense, because, what if it was my wife or my kids, and, I'd like to know that, they were ready to call the police or do whatever. So those kind of things.
Someone's always watching, and the interesting part about this slide is that the overall workflow is not any different from AI projects from 20 years ago. I was lucky enough to work on the early language models at Google for machine translation, and this is essentially what we would do. We would build out our model, we would train it, validate it, we'd see what we scored, and then we'd try something else and constantly refactoring the modeling. What's changed is the tooling around it. So back then, the barrier to entry was prohibitive for companies to jump in there and just start doing AI. And now you have the tools through things like Azure where you can do it very quickly.
Yep. Yeah. Good point, Tom. Yep. So when you're talking about your organization and digital transformation, what I would call digital transformation, right? So again, artificial intelligence at the core of that is your enterprise data strategy or enterprise data, right? And then at Microsoft, we kind of look at it across several different ways. We look at how are you engaging your customers, your constituents, or your troops? How are you transforming your products or your offerings, or your services? How are you empowering your employees? That's how can you use it to empower your employees or optimize operations? So go ahead, Tom, next. Yeah, so these are just some examples, and you can go ahead and build that out, Tom, that's fine. These are just some examples of where you might use either predictive analytics or AI to help, like as far as engage your customers. We see a lot of customers with conversational agents, chatbots. It really helps because they've got, with today's day and age, I don't have the resources with the amount. Now there's a lot more higher volume on call centers. And so this helps to at least get some of the initial, hey, forgot my login password, or get some of the simple questions out of the way. And then also to customize some of the personal engagement. So if customer X is online, chatting and needs to know information about their account, that information can be pulled up very quickly and shared. And so a neighbor of mine, She works for one of the large insurance companies in the area, and they're doing a kind of a hybrid model of this, where again, it's answering the simple questions, but as it gets to be, the questions get to be more deep and focused, it immediately transfers over, but that person's already assigned, and it makes it quick and easy. So employee productivity, there's just a lot of areas where, as far as employees go regarding, their benefits, there's always questions around that, or in some cases, looking at where your employees' needs are, and helping to meet some of those needs, and then transforming products and optimizing operations. We'll talk a little bit more about the operations here in a minute with some of the examples that we have. Go ahead. Any questions at this point? Okay.
Hey, Pete, we do have one question from John. I don't know if you can see the chat window, or Tom, if you can. Otherwise.
Yep, I got it.
Okay.
So, let's see. Do you have a capture of bandwidth IT requirements by application? Left to right.
I think
So,
back
ahead.
on this slide.
So, okay. So capturing bandwidth requirements. No, I mean, this slide doesn't necessarily address, and I hope I'm answering your question, John. This slide doesn't necessarily address bandwidth requirements. That's going to be based on what model, first of all, I know we're talking about cloud, but it's also going to depend on how much of that data are you trying to pull down, and what is your current, what does it look like for you to have access to that cloud, right? What is your bandwidth that you're accessing? And when we talk about satellite relays, that's going to be different because that bandwidth is very expensive. But if you're just talking about, company to company or those kind of things, it's really going to depend on what the amount of data you're trying to push through. Does that answer your question, or did I miss something? Go ahead and come off mute if you had to clarify. Okay, well, you can always ping me later, John. Okay, thanks. This is just again, this is just a slide. This kind of shows the different levels of data services that might be needed, starting, with the data sources at the bottom, and the types of services you might need if you were looking at something like Azure, like Data Lake, any sensor feeds that you might be using. You'll see a couple examples that we're going to show where we have, like, it's IoT, Internet of Things. We have sensors on certain things that are feeding data into our data from our data sources, and then feeding that up through. And then you get into more of here's where we're starting to manage the analytics platform, the big data and the data warehousing and some of the streaming, and then kind of pushing that up through predictive analytics all the way up to the end users, whatever kind of device they're using that on. Some of you may be familiar with Power BI, reporting services, those kind of things, which is a great start. We find that with our customers, when we're going through the AI discussions and starting to talk to them about building models, the first thing we put up is Power BI, where we're able to get some of the, get a good sense for what their data looks like. And it starts bringing out insights in their data that they never saw before, right? And how you can do that. So again, this is just the end-to-end platform capabilities that we bring in. So next slide, Tom. So I'd be remiss, in the gentleman behind me in the picture would probably, strangle me if I didn't talk about, ethics and AI and responsible AI. My thing has always been that just because we can do it doesn't mean we should, right? So, you hear a lot about ethics around AI, like you see it in the news all the time, like, just because we have technology that can kind of target certain terrorists or bad actors, should we use it to do that, right? And that really becomes an ethical question. And at AI, at Microsoft, we take it pretty darn seriously that whenever we have an AI solution or a customer comes to us with an AI need, If it involves people, obviously children, or it involves the safety therein of people and humans and all, we have to run that through our ethics committee and say, hey, is this really something we should be doing, right? And we've turned down a number of large customers, believe it or not, that have that we said, no, this is probably not something we want to get involved with, right? In some cases, we've had to have a discussion with the customer about that, why this doesn't seem ethically right. And it's not that Satya or somebody is going to make that decision. We have a committee that spans across a diverse group of people within Microsoft that actually provides that input. And so it's important that, whatever you do, you have a policy around what would be considered. There's some, I won't mention the grocery store chain, but, this is something that some people would say is on the edge of ethics, but it's basically putting what we call, shelf observation, right? So as a person is going down the aisle and their eyes are going up and down the shelf, and let's just say, I'm 50-year-old person and I'm in the diaper aisle. Well, chances are they know, chances are percentage of me being a father is not good, but me being like a grandfather is a lot higher percentage. And so what you might see at the shelf edge now is like, hey, Pampers on sale for like, whatever, $5 or whatever Pampers sell for. And it's going to get my attention, right? Because they see that maybe my eyes are wandering and I don't know really what I'm looking for, right? So they're going to help me out a little bit. So is that something that, we should be doing? I don't know. That's something that this particular store chain felt was good for helping to sell more product, right? And provide coupons at the shelf edge that, hey, if you buy it today, you'll get it off at the register, right? So, and just based on who I am, whether male, female, older, younger. So it's making some judgment calls on that, right? And that's, again, becomes this appear, and you'll see this in some of the videos we have, this appears to be a 50-year-old man looking for, this particular product. So, but you got to have that discussion. So here's just some information around how can you make it real for your business. So and these are active links if you get the presentation. For the Azure AI platform, it talks a little bit about our platform. And then if you want to assess your own AI maturity model, we have an assessment that you can actually take a look at and see where you are on that spectrum of either, hey, we either have some work to do in these areas or we're good to go, right? And then the AI Business School, which is good. If there's some training things there that you can take a look at and help get you kickstarted, or use partners like Marathon that can help kickstart you into that direction and get you the knowledge you need for your organization. So go ahead, Tom, let's go into the, how are we doing on time, Dan? We doing okay?
We are fine.
Okay, so let's, so here's just some case studies that kind of came to mind. Now, these are all healthcare. And the reason why I kind of pulled these up because they're doing some interesting things with predictive analytics. So Centera, local, Norfolk-based, organization, 2,800 beds, 300 sites. They were having some issues around what I would call like a 360-degree view of their patients. So if they had a patient that checked into a hospital that, was in the North Carolina area, and then they, like 4 weeks later, they rechecked into a hospital in, say, Chesapeake, then that wasn't connecting. And so, you as a consumer, you're like, wait a minute, you guys don't have my records from North Carolina, and so we embarked on the initial conversation started out to be AI, but we had to say, look, you need really an enterprise data management strategy first, right? You've got to get all this data either pulled together in a way that you can see your patients across the board, no matter what hospital or what, where they're sitting. And so anyway, so this was a good start for them. to get started with their enterprise data management, which again is the core to any kind of advanced analytics or enterprise data or any kind of big data strategies that you're moving into. So we move over into Indiana University of Health, patient forecasting. The CFO came to us and said, hey, you know what, we're trying to just really watch our costs, and we need a way to predict, when patients are coming into the hospital. We're like, wow, okay, yeah, well, let's see what we can do there. So they knew what their inventory was. They had X amount of doctors and nurses and beds and supplies and all of those things. And we started looking at patterns, right, from their previous, I think we went back as far as we could. I think we went back at least 10 years of data to look at where their patterns flowed. That included things like when viruses hit. Of course, with a virus like COVID, that's kind of an outlier in a sense. That's something that, maybe it's gonna play into future forecasting. But if just the common cold, the annual cycles on viruses and things like that, they were able to start predicting to a pretty decent degree, like how many doctors they would need on staff and what kind of supplies they would need, how many beds they would need month to month as they went through. So that was something that was deemed very successful. And they were able to start getting some accurate patient forecasting. And again, and the more they used the model and the more data they were getting, the more accurate it was becoming. So that we were able to save them a bunch of money, not bringing staff on just for the sake of staff, just to have them stand around, and also ordering supplies, which was probably where they had the most savings, is when and where they had ordered supplies. Beck & Dickinson, which is they're a medical provider. They have a number of facilities around the country, but they also are a service provider to other medical institutions that are looking for solutions. So this picture here of this medical cabinet, it has a lot of medications in it. Where they were having issues was in inventory control, inventory management, right? The people that were prescribing and pulling medicines out weren't logging them correctly. This has a combination of RFID and some other IoT cameras. So as they pull medications out of this unit, it's actually tracking and logging them, which in the past, for them to get accurate inventory management quantities and where they were, it would take them probably a month to collect all this information from the various medical centers they had across the country. And so this gave them almost near real time. I call it near real time, right? It's not going to be like up to the moment, but it's probably pretty darn close to within an hour. They would have an accurate inventory of what medicines were where. And of course, certain medicines are monitored by the DEA. So this helped them with the reporting back to the government regarding what potentially dangerous medicines were being used as well. So because the one thing you don't want to do is come up short when the DEA says, well, you had X amount in inventory last month and now you use this much, and if those numbers are different, there's got to be an accounting for that, right? So those are a couple of areas where we kind of started with the enterprise data, moved a little bit more into some forecasting, predictive analytics, and then we started moving into some IoT. Now with the inventory management, now they can do some predictions on what hospitals, what units are going to need what medicines the most, and they can start doing some planning around that. So what will happen and how can I make it happen? Those are answering those questions that we had before. Okay, next slide there, Tom. So this, let me do this. So I'll talk about the U.S. Army in a second here, but the Rolls-Royce was one of our customers, and they not only sell jet engines, they also maintain them, and they have a service to maintain them. And they wanted to be able to offer their customers a way to start predicting failures. And so they ended up putting sensors on a lot of their components on their jet engines that were starting to sense whether a part was getting worn or it was reaching its peak performance. A lot of these, especially in aircraft engines and in other other equipment that depends on a lot on safety, they do have a recommended life usage, and those parts will get replaced whether they're still good or not, because it's coming to an end of life and they don't want it to fail in the air. So there's a little bit of the data that came from that. And so the idea where they wanted to reduce the cost of unscheduled disruptions, and so they can pull something out of the line way before it was actually needed. And so they were able to also, this helped with them to predict when failures were going to happen, but also help their customers to plan for it too. In other words, they might have parts on those engines that were like, hey, within the next 6 months, you got to start thinking about replacing these parts, right? So, and in today's market right now, these sensors that go on, these are not that expensive. A lot of people think, well, you're gonna put 1,000 sensors on an aircraft engine. Yeah, people think that's expensive, but it's not. These sensors are not expensive, and we're finding a lot of customers are starting to do that. I believe Marathon has been working with Caterpillar Marine Division. They've done some of that. And we've worked with Otis Elevators and a lot of other customers like that have used IoT to really help manage their services and their equipment. So, fuel management. So Maersk, shipping company, they're the ones you see, floating out in the bay with the shipping containers on them. That's one of them. Anyway, they were looking for a way to manage their fuel and their engine performance. So as they started seeing some of the cargo carriers that were consuming more fuel than usual, right? That kind of signaled, hey, there might be something wrong here. That helped them to look at some of the engine performance, and then also helped them with to reduce some fuel consumption, right? And so in the shipping business, I mean, it's almost a low margin business. And so the more they could save on fuel and maintenance, the better. And then, so the U.S. Army, so there's a tactical unit in the U.S. Army that basically it's a wide area network on a battlefield. And what they needed to do was stand up a network that could do intrusion detection. So if they were in a situation where they had, now we're talking like a couple hundred trucks, right, that are out there relaying Wi-Fi networking so that you could have network on the battlefield. You don't want to get hacked, especially by the bad actors out there. So we helped them with some intrusion detection using AI, and it was monitoring what would be normal network activity. And then if it had an anomaly that was sort of like, hey, this doesn't look right, then it was we would flag that, and the action officer would then have to take action and figure out what they needed to do, either shut down that part of the network or something else. So it's not limited to if you're in manufacturing or you're building jet engines or you're shipping containers. You could actually do these kinds of things on your local area network if you're concerned about intrusion and intrusion detection. So, and this was something that we've taken out of the commercial market and applied to our military, right? And so this was initially done on an unclassified network, and so it worked out very well. That's all I had. Tom, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, I appreciate people hanging on a little past 1. I know we're a little bit past, but the recording, if you do have to drop, I appreciate everybody listening, and the recording and slides will be shared. I did want to share a couple quick success stories here that Marathon has had for local companies. And one of them is at Chartway Federal Credit Union with their data analytics team. They wanted to leverage all the data that they've been collecting about their members, as well as in the banking industry. A lot of that knowledge is tied up in other third parties and other details like that, where they have to pull that data together. So they really did a deep dive, and we helped them along the way of what they had, where they wanted to get to in terms of modeling a data warehouse, and then really generating an analytic data model, which they can build reports off of, and empower their users to answer their own questions. That's what they wanted to get to, so that they weren't having to write a new report from every request from every banking center and every division of the company. And really meant that they got to generate a lot of rapid report development, meaningful dashboards, and a lot of ad hoc reports. And where the AI comes in is that they can start to do more predictive analysis and really make an impact on promotions they write, run, member retention, collection activities. And Marathon was able to really pull a lot of different technologies together in the SQL and Azure stack to really pull all this data together and start making some of those analysis. And there's more information up on our website if you're ever curious. But we are tight for time, so I don't want to spend too much time there because I also want to share this second Libera example. But one thing about Chartway that I wanted to point out is that they learned a lot in developing their first model, and they just didn't put that model out there and say they were done. It's been a constant iterative process of building this up and gaining more and more insights and expanding to more and more data where they're able to look through more. So they really use their like a stage process like we talked about earlier, where they build that out. Now, Libera, I think many people are familiar with, as you can pass by on 664 and see their big trucks out there sometime. These are the humongous mining trucks that will move about 250 to 350 tons of dirt in mining sites across the world. And Libera, the characteristics of these systems is usually that there's a driver driving, and there is all kinds of different signals. Each wheel is powered by its own motor. There's all kinds of hydraulics and things like that that is constantly collecting data on these various machines. And Libera has always been the one to collect the data for themselves, and then engineers would analyze it and look at what's happening. But obviously that was a very manual process. And they wanted to build out this mining data portal where they're taking all their information from their trucks and taking that log information and then putting it up there so that customers can have access as well as people can have access. And if you think about the data collection, you have these trucks in the field through a SAT link or Wi-Fi mesh network. Their data is pulled off. And then some data is fed right to real time so that clients can see where their truck is, how fast it's going, what's currently going on. And then some's put through a data analysis sort of track where that data is being analyzed and then eventually being put in a way in a huge big data model for visualization, for flagging recommendations. So going through some rule-based and models to look for certain things, and trying to prevent faults. So if you think about recommendations, you might have a driver that truck A is being driven really fast when this driver is at the wheel. Or they've even built out models to say, okay, based on the feedback we're getting from the wheels and the suspension, this part and where that's happening, this part of the path in your mind needs to be re-leveled because it's causing the suspension to work harder than it needs to and wearing out that part. And also from these recommendations, they can get to more predictive truck maintenance where they can solve a problem in a maintenance window rather than something breaking down and then urgently fixing it. And parts is a big piece of their business. So it's very important that they get that stuff out there. And here's just some quick screenshots showing, how the fleet's visualized. This kind of shows more of a real-time view, as well as they can track what they're currently doing at that given moment. And then this shows more like historic indicators so that they can kind of look at their data over time and really build out these performance indicators to really see what's going on with their systems. Now we had one video we wanted to show. Pete, do you want to introduce this video while I pull it up?
Sure. So before you pull it up though, let's just kind of get into any questions. Does anybody have any questions?
We had one question from Rick Severinghouse. I'll just read it. Has Rolls-Royce embraced the digital twin concept for their engine monitoring?
Yes, they have. That's a good question. They absolutely have. So that was one thing I probably failed to mention that, but that they have adopted that. And several other of our other customers have done the same thing. Exactly. So, and Mercedes is another one that is doing this. Mercedes trucks is doing the same thing as well.
Very good. I think that's the only active question we have. So Tom, why don't you go ahead for the video?
All right.
So, yeah, go ahead and get it. So this video is really about drone inspection. So one of the things about AI that's really kind of cool is it's actually saving a lot in lives, because one of the things is before drones came along and AI came along, these had to be inspected by somebody sitting in a helicopter flying over these things. And if it was bad weather or something, there was always the risk of that copter going down and people getting hurt. So with drones now, they're able to fly these over these lines. Some of them are programmed to automatically do it. I think in this video, they're actually using a controller to control it. But you can see what it's doing is it's looking at the lines and then it's highlighting where the trees are like growing a little bit too close or there's some interference. So now they can mark that point and then they can send out the maintenance truck to sort of clear it out, right? And so that's that's one thing that's pretty cool about what AI is doing and how it's saving time and money and efforts to do those kind of things. It's just doing pattern recognitions and saying, hey, there should be nothing within whatever that distance is, 20 feet of the power lines. And if there is, flag it, highlight it, and let me know. And then you can see the guys there. I believe there, you can see if you look closely enough, but these have been also programmed just to follow the lines for a certain period of time and then go back to where they came from, go back home, that kind of thing. And then before we close out, I think we had another video. Did you want to introduce that one, Tom?
Sure. So one other video that, sort of is a little bit more inspiring and talks about the Emma watch that was developed, and the video kind of explains what's going on there. So let me play that, and just a quick one, 2 minutes.
Right, I'm going to try and replicate this here. You're off to a great start. I tend to kind of just avoid doing sketching and writing now because it's not really worth it if you get something like that. Anything you could do that would just make my hand do what I want it to do and to be able to sign my name would be an incredible thing.
How do we even just begin to help her overcome this particular symptom of her tremors and helping her be able to her writing ability, her drawing ability. So what I'm doing is I'm making a very rough prototype, and what this board does is I can connect into it through these wires, these tiny coin cell motors. So these motors will vibrate. I personally think that what this is doing is it's short-circuiting whatever feedback loop there is between the brain and the hand that's causing the tremors. So the idea is if you are distracted by the vibration, are you able to write better? I don't know. I don't know.
It's affecting something. I don't quite know what's happening.
I'm on to something, right? I'm on to something.
Jesus Christ.
Oh my God.
It makes me forget that I have a tremor. I've drawn one of them for a long time. I've actually just written my name for like the first time in ages.
I can't believe it.
Mum, it's called the Emma.
Oh, brilliant.
It's got my name on it. Right.
So some really inspiring stuff there. You know, when we think about AI, we think about how it can improve our business, but also think about how it can improve our lives around us as well.
Yeah, that is a great video, and it's pretty touching too when you see that and how it can really impact someone's life. So, okay, I think that about wraps it up. If anybody has any questions, there's our email addresses. Feel free to reach out to Tom or me or both. Be happy to answer any other questions you have around big data and AI. Thank you for attending.
Yeah, I think for the sake of time, we'll just wrap it up. And Tom and Pete, thank you both. This was outstanding presentation. It ran a little long, so we don't have time for the cash drawing today, but come to the next meeting and maybe we will. But all kidding aside, AI's come a long way from robotic vacuum cleaners, and it's just amazing what the applications are out there. Mr. Gates appears to still be smiling, kind of. So right. Pete, I think you're okay. But again, if you would both, Tom and Pete, send me your presentations and your links and all that, then I'll package it all off to all registrants along with the video as early as this evening, as soon as you can get me the materials. But again, my personal thanks, thanks from all the people who participated. I think it was just an outstanding program. So thank you again.
Thanks again.
All right.
Thank you so much for the opportunity, Dan. You have a great day.
Yep. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.
See you guys.